Splash Mountain closes for the last time on May 31st, 2023, to make way for its retrofit, Tiana's Bayou. Splash Mountain opened on July 17th, 1989, way after the popularity of its theming, 1946's Song of the South, had come and gone. If you want a deep dive into Song of the South and its racist history, listen to Karina Longworth's 6th episode arc on the subject on her podcast, You Must Remember This. Here, we are going to focus on the ride's history and how it was redirected and partially saved. To begin with, Imagineer Tony Baxter was stuck in traffic, so he took time to come up with an idea of how to bring guests back to Bear Country. His lightbulb moment was using characters from Song of the South to theme a log flume ride, a water attraction that executives had been asking for, and the $75 million Splash Mountain was born. So it was as easy as that. Well, not hardly. They were deep into the building of the ride and staging, but realized they had no story. So they asked Imagineer Dave Fighton, who had recently retooled the Country Bear Jamboree for the holidays, to work on the project. Here's Imagineer Dave Fighton with the story.
I told him no. I said, no, I don't like what you did. The model looks terrible for me, the first model, and it's just staged all wrong. And I said, no one's going to let me, move all these figures because I already knew that they're already in the ground, already wired. You'd have to rip all that up to move them and restage them correctly. A lot of it just didn't make sense. The story didn't make sense the way they staged it. And they had all these America Sings figures, and what they try to do is cram every single one of them into the show. So every 10 to 15 feet, they would put a figure on either side of the water. But you didn't know which way to look because you just, every 15 feet, there'd be a new figure. You'd be turning left and right and left and right, and you're all equally spaced apart. And they were there for no reason, and I just said, it's just a mess. And so they left, and they came back like 2 days later and said, okay, what do you need? We still need you to come and do all this work for us. We'll let you move all the figures wherever you want. You can throw figures out if you want to throw them away if you don't like them, but we need you to restage this and fix it. And we will get with maintenance and give our approval for you and give you the money you need to do all this work. And I was really leery about it. And they then made me go down to Disneyland and look at everything and go through the model again and really analyze it. And they didn't give up on me. Eventually I said, okay, I didn't have anything to do at that time, and I wasn't busy, so I got into it and started looking at it, and I met with Bruce Gordon and we walked through the ride, and the first thing I did was I threw 10 of the figures out, actually removed them and cut them from the show. Yeah, they crammed every single one in there, and it just made no sense. Well, they didn't really have a story. They just placed all the figures, and I tried to create a story around the rabbit and the fox. So one of the problems is I wanted to build more rabbits in different scenarios, like where the rabbit was tied up with a rope or with a beehive on the rabbit. And they kept coming to me and said, well, you can't have any more money. You can't build new figures. That's too expensive. Like one of the things I came up with this new invention on my own was to have this hopping rabbit, and which had never been done before. And I was always looking for ways to do animatronics where they were just much more interesting and appealing to the audience, that they would just go, wow, I've never seen a rabbit hop on a fence or hop. So I showed them how to do it. I did the sketches of it, and they added and incorporated into Tokyo and Florida, but it didn't get in Disneyland. And then I started staging the characters, so like all the geese were grouped better rather than individually. They originally were not just crammed in there. They tried to put them equally distance apart and not as groups. So like the frogs weren't all together, the geese weren't all together, the alligators weren't together. Mark Davis taught me a lot about how to stage. You want to use small, medium, and large in different head heights and group them so that you, instead of looking at them individually, you see them as a group and they sing together as a group. And that way your eye stays on them and your eyes don't get pushed to go to the left or right and try and catch the other character. And Mark did this really well in Pirates of the Caribbean and Country Bears and other shows that in America Sings, where you really control the audience's eye exactly where to look. But that also has to do with the sound and the lighting. So when you group them together, you light that whole scene up, and everywhere else to the left and right and behind you, you don't have light on it, and you tone that down. So your eye goes where the light is and where the group is. Also, all the speakers are then built into either into the figure or into boxes or into the rock wall so that the sound is projected directly toward you. So you also know where to look by just hearing where the sound's coming from. If you have figures scattered everywhere, every left and right, then you have speakers from every direction, and you hear that and you don't know which way to look because you just hear sound every which way. So the trick for staging is to stage them as groups. Then to put pauses after that. So you don't want to just do another group immediately right after. You need to put a pause or separate the groups where you have some dead space, for example. So you might have a bunch of trees or you may have a rock wall. And what happens is that helps control the sound and the lighting and kind of separate it if you think of it as rooms. And as you then go into the next room, you can change the song very easily and you can change the lighting. All the rooms don't become so busy. You don't have to have a figure on every 15 feet. Sometimes you can just do it with sets and just simple trees or rock work, and that just becomes entertaining on its own. And then when you get to the next group of figures, it's just much more interesting for the audience that way. But the maintenance guys, fortunately, they didn't get mad at me. I really thought they would, because it was a lot of work for the Disneyland maintenance to dig all that up, rewire it, run all new wires and cables to the cabinets in order to reposition it. Plus, you had to put Neil's new steel frame to support the figure in the ground or wherever it was. And then from that, you run the cable underneath the ground all the way to the cabinet. So that's a lot of work. And then you have to then re-cement it and repaint it. I thought these people would hate me, but they actually liked it, and they were happy that I was fixing it. And I didn't get any complaints from the maintenance staff, and they seemed to be more than willing. When they were first building the ride, and they had changed the length of the logs itself, the ride vehicle, and I think they extended and made them longer, so the capacity went way up. But what happened is those logs didn't, when they ran those new vehicles on the track system, they didn't fit correctly and they didn't make some of the turns. So they would get caught up or they would bind or just run into problems on certain turns. So they actually had to cut out the track and reshape those turns so that these newer vehicles could actually make the turn without getting stuck.
Speaking of doing things on the fly,
normally you want to pre-program it in nice conditions, like at the Tahunga building. They had a mock-up building there where you could mock up the set and the figures. Pre-program everything, then send it down and install it in the ride, and then you just touch it up and make sure that the eye level is correct. And that's normally how they did most of stuff like at Epcot. But in Splash Mountain, because they put all the figures right there in the sets, all the programming had to be done on site. We would have the water out of the flume usually when we work, because we wanted to have the right eye level so we knew exactly where people looked from the boat. so that the figures would always look right at the boat or the people in the boat. So you got the eye level correct. So that was the other thing, was we didn't want to have any water in the flume. And then usually around 6 p.m. or so, they would kick us out of there, and the ride operators would start practicing, and they'd start running water through it. And then we usually couldn't work after that. Everybody wanted, their time on Splash Mountain. So the construction crews wanted their time. The painters wanted their time in there. We had to do our programming time, and everyone had to do, fight over time. And then the ride operators also wanted their time to just run the ride without anyone in there. And they usually ran at night. So we set up a system to where the ride operators were supposed to give 3 notices over the loudspeaker to tell us, usually about 10 minutes apart, when they were going to be riding the ride, and everyone had to be clear of it. And then they were supposed to walk people through the entire track and make sure nothing was in the trough, any computer equipment or extension cords or shovels or anything, any equipment, and certainly no people in it. But it didn't happen that way every time. As the ride operators got new people and they were just learning how, they forgot to follow the rules and they didn't do it 3 times. And one day we were in the trough on the weekend and we were by ourselves, and there were no construction crews that day because of the weekend. I was busy programming and Todd was off to the side taking a nap. I had my headphones on, so it was a little hard to hear the loudspeaker. And all of a sudden we heard the loudspeaker came on all muffled where we were, and it said something about, we're turning on the water now, ride is starting immediately. And we didn't get our normal 2 notices 10 minutes apart beforehand. And I took out my headphones. Did you hear that? What did they say? And all of a sudden I look up and I see the water turn on, and it's coming down the trough right at us. And we panicked and quickly grabbed all the equipment and the computer and the intercom, and I literally threw it out of the trough and off to the side. And we didn't get everything. The extension cords were quickly unplugged, and I jumped out of there right when the water hit my feet so I wouldn't get electrocuted. But the extension cords got caught, and some of the stuff went down with the water, and it disappeared. But we were nearly electrocuted that day, or nearly lost equipment, and we ended up going up to the ride operators and pretty pissed off and scolding them, follow the rules and don't do that again.
And when it finally came time for opening day, Dave Fighton was barely awake enough to enjoy it.
I think I was there, but I think I was just too tired to enjoy it. I just was too burnt out. I think they tried to interview me, but I looked half asleep. You're just so burnt out by the end and so exhausted. You just want to take a vacation for a month and not do anything. It's really hard to be in that environment every day all the time. And, it's an hour drive to get there from WDI and an hour back. And to do that all the time was really, really difficult. Sometimes I regretted it and sometimes I didn't. I kind of looked at it as like, look, they're building a Walt Disney World Splash Mountain and a Tokyo Splash Mountain. Everybody wanted it. They seemed to all like the ride. No matter how I looked at it, I was going to be involved one way or the other.